Hello, and welcome to our program, Astronomy for Everyone. This month's program is actually two different parts. Part one will be an interview that my guest on this month's show, John McGill, had with astronaut Doug Hurley. And we'll have you watch that, of course, and then the second part will be about the Crew 5 launch. So, John, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, hi, Don. Glad to be back.
Now, I understand that Doug Hurley was the first commander to fly with the SpaceX Crew Dragon?
Yeah, and he was also a crew member of the last space shuttle mission, STS-135.
Exactly. So how did this interview take place? How were you able to get it?
Well, we were down there for the SLS Orion launch, or the Artemis, and he was down there and he was walking through the media center. And so I cornered him and got him to sit down, and he was gracious enough to give me an interview.
Great. Well, I'm glad you were able to do that. So let's take a look at that interview right now.
Okay, we're here with Doug Hurley, astronaut and former Marine, and he flew on the Shuttle and the Crew Dragon. So Doug, how has your life changed since you retired?
Yeah, good question. So I got a job with Northrop Grumman Propulsion Systems. So they're the ones that build the solid rocket boosters. They had built them for Shuttle and now built for SLS. And moved my family from beautiful Houston, Texas, out to Utah. We live out in the mountains now, and I've been there just about a year, settling in nicely. It's a great team, and we love living out there, and we love what we're doing.
And I gotta say, when I seen you in here first, I knew that face, but without seeing you in your astronaut blues,
my flight suit.
Yeah. It's a different world. You know, it's like one of those moments when you're in a store and you see somebody. But do you get that a lot, or?
Yeah, I think there are times when folks I had a TSA person. I remember I was going through security at Washington National, and I had just gotten through, and I was waiting to get my bags come through the machine, and the guy's like, "Hey, wait, stop." And then I'm like, "Uh-oh, what did I do? What did I put in my luggage?" And he's like, "I just saw you on that Netflix thing." And so we got talking about DM2 and SpaceX and all those things. So it was fun. So that does happen every now and again.
You look a lot happier now that you're retired.
Yeah, we had our moments during, I think our post-flight after DM2 was pretty challenging with COVID and all the politics at the time. And, we had lived in Houston for 21 years, and, both my wife and I grew up in a really small town. Mine was about 400 people and hers was about 70. And so we always just had it was hard to live in a town with 3 million people, and so we always had everything we wanted. We had good friends there and all that, but we were really enjoying living in a smaller town in Utah and enjoying the mountains and the change of seasons, and then just the great team we have at Northrop Grumman. It's been fun.
So let's go back to when you were flying. What's one of your most memorable moments flying the Shuttle?
The Shuttle, it'd be hard to put, just pick one. My first, getting to space the first time on STS-127, I remember looking out the window and looking over at my commander, Mark Polanski. Remember that as just an incredible moment. And then, certainly that first time you look at the Earth from space. I remember on STS-135, after we had undocked from space station, after the dock mission was over, and we shut all the lights off on the flight deck and just kind of hung there. The four of us hung out together and talked and looked out the window as we did a pass at night. It was mostly a night pass for that part of it, and and then there was this other time on STS-135 when we were docked, where we were, Sandy, Magnus and I were in the cupola, and the aurora was so dramatic that summer in 2011, and we were flying right through this. It was Aurora Australis, or the Southern Lights, but we were flying right through this aurora in the cupola, and it just was the incredible vivid greens and pinks and reds, and it felt like we were in a science fiction movie, even though we were actually science fact. You know, we were on ISS in July of 2011. It was just, yeah. So I think those from Shuttle were pretty special and stand out even this many years later.
So as far as the cupola, I was able to get it in your simulator there in Houston.
Yeah.
And so how do you compare the real cupola to that? You know, I know that it has the dome in it, like a planetarium dome, and you know, it gives you somewhat, but I just can't imagine.
Yeah, the you know, of course, the cupolas, the windows are scratched a little bit now on board Space Station, but the view is just, I mean, it's breathtaking. I mean, you just, every time you know, you get the opportunity to go sit in the cupola, you know, through a portion of an orbit, or if you're lucky enough for a whole orbit, you know, a whole 90 minutes flying around the Earth, it's just unreal. And I never got to do that during my shuttle missions. One, because the first mission, the cupola wasn't there. Second mission, you know, like every shuttle mission, it's just so busy. You just don't have that kind of time. But thankfully, you know, when DM2 got extended to be a 2-month-ish, you know, what they tell us when we launched, 1 to 4 months is what it would be. You know, we had the opportunity a few times to spend a little more time in the cupola because we were ISS crew members for a couple months. So I actually got to take a really cool picture of Bob and Chris on an EVA. And as far as I know, nobody's ever taken a picture like that where you'd have both EVA crew members right next to each other. And that was right out of the cupola. And you know, that was pretty special. And of course, just, yeah, the views, I don't know, you know, whether it's the Bahamas or the Caribbean, whether it's thunderstorms over the, you know, Southeast Asia, whether it's, you know, the different colors of the deserts in Africa, the Himalayas. I mean, it's just, you could just sit up there all day, every day. If you just had something to eat and something to drink, you could probably spend an entire day up there if you wanted to.
Well, I think we're all jealous of you right now.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And how about your last shuttle mission? Can you tell us what was special about that?
So the last shuttle mission, well, I think, you know, just the being part of the end of a program, an end of an era, an end of 30-year program, I thought was pretty special. I was, you know, certainly honored to be part of the crew. It was a small crew of 4, you know, 3 great friends and crewmates and astronauts. You know, I couldn't have been luckier. You know, just being a part of it, being able to thank, you know, people constantly that had worked on shuttle programs for almost their entire careers, if not their entire careers. And so it was a little tough because there were many moments during kind of those last 6 months before we flew where people were having their last day of work supporting us in one way, shape, or form. And so, and for example, the closeout crew, you know, that strapped us into Atlantis, that was their last day of work if we launched that day. So that part of it was tough, but it was an honor to be, you know, to end the program in the way we did, and you know, being able to, you know, pay tribute to all those folks that contributed to the shuttle program throughout its 30-year history. You know, we tried really hard to do that, and yeah, it was just, it was a great way to wrap up the shuttle program.
All of those closing remarks when you guys did land, those were choice words.
Yeah, Chris did a great job, and you know, he was obviously a really talented astronaut, but he also had a way with being able to, you know, say the right things at the right time, you know, and thanking the different teams. You know, every time, you know, as we got close to the end of the mission, thanking the different mission control teams. That was their last time on console, and that was the last time shuttle was going to dock and all that stuff, and you know, closing out that portion of that era was, yeah, it was really neat to be a part of.
So how did you like going up in Crew Dragon?
It was pretty good. Yeah, it was. I think what people don't realize is that was certainly from SpaceX, and I think to a degree from NASA's perspective, that was a decade's worth of work, to get to that point. And a lot of people, dedicated, a chunk of their time and career. And then, of course, we started probably 5 or 6 years before we launched, and got to the point where there was, Bob and I and a small team of NASA folks, were essentially living out in California those last couple of years before we flew. So just an incredible satisfaction to get, a spacecraft, certainly they had gone a long way in developing the Falcon 9, but Crew Dragon was a drastically different vehicle than Cargo Dragon. So, helping, to be helping as best we could from a design and crew operability standpoint, being involved with that stuff basically from the ground floor was pretty satisfying, for 2 test pilots, and then getting it to the point where we flew the mission successfully. It's, that was STS-135 was a unique opportunity, but being on the ground floor and being able to fly a space vehicle for the first time, that hadn't happened very often in history. So it was really cool to be a part of that and to honor the teams both at SpaceX and both NASA with a successful mission. And now look, 2 years later, we've got Crew 4 on board and Crew 5 getting ready to launch. So pretty neat.
Yeah, that and which one between the Space Shuttle and the Crew Dragon, which gave you the best ride?
Oh, I think they both were great rides. Any ride that gets you to where you're going and back is a great ride. Yeah, it would be. It's like choose your favorite kid. That's just hard. I think they're drastically different ways to get to space in a sense. The shuttle, the thrust weight of the shuttle and just the speed at which we got into orbit, acceleration was incredible. Crew Dragon, much smaller vehicle. Shuttle was about a 250,000 pound vehicle. Crew Dragon was about 25, so it's like the equivalent of a big 18-wheeler in a small car. From what you feel and what you perceive, and uniquely different, but both were kind of neat rides to space. Biggest differences, obviously, were the G profile with Dragon was more. Shuttle was about 3 Gs going up and about a G and a quarter to a G and a half coming back. Crew Dragon was 4.5 going up and about 4.5 to 5 coming back, plus the parachute. That whole parachute sequence is crazy. We were warned about it or talked about it with our friends that had flown on Soyuz that once those parachutes start coming out, you are all over the place inside the crew module. You're spinning, you're tumbling, and then it kind of just settles out. So very dramatically different than the very precise roll reversals that we had with Shuttle, and then a piloted approach and landing, which was not drastically different than what you feel in an airliner, but in a capsule it is much more dynamic. And then of course splashing down in the water rather than landing on a runway.
That's I remember being out there in Hawthorne, and we kind of called it the makeup meeting with Elon and Jim Bridenstine. And did that make you any uncomfortable being part of that, or?
No. In fact, if I write a book, there'll be a great chapter about that whole episode, because we were in a room with Jim, Elon, Gwen, the deputy administrator, Jim Morhart, I think his name was, Ralph Rowe, Kathy Leaders was in there, so she was CCP, the program manager for commercial crew. Lee Rosen, who was the VP, one of the VPs for SpaceX, and it was a very productive meeting. And in the end, we got the newer version of the parachutes, which we desperately needed. And it wasn't long after that we flew. It was about a year and a half later.
Yeah, I remember the remarks Jim made it there.
I will tell you, one of the things that SpaceX is really good at doing, in fact, you could say maybe the best, is fly, test, fix, fly, test, fix, fly, test, fix.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to put words in Bob's mouth, but it was, I think he and I were the right two people to work with SpaceX for that first flight, because I think Bob and I are a little more measured and maybe, in that SpaceX's way of developing a vehicle was different than traditional flight test, where you analyze, and then you build up to one test and you hope that the numbers kind of end up right down the middle. Whereas SpaceX, they just build things and they test the living.
Yeah, they push them beyond the limit.
They push them way beyond, and then they do a lot more testing. They have a lot more hardware that they can. And it was challenging working through that, because we lost a rocket on the pad during development of Crew Dragon. We lost a rocket in space, and we lost the DM-1 capsule in a ground test here for the Super Dracos. And so, you're not used to that. I mean, we almost lost a Super Hornet in flight test when I was in flight test in the Super Hornet. Bob was a test director for the F-22, and they almost lost an F-22. I think they did lose one at some point, but I'm not sure he was there. But, blowing up multiple vehicles and then, of course, a ton of hardware, it's a different philosophy, and frankly, it takes some getting used to. But in the end, we... and then they did where they intentionally lost a first stage when they did the in-flight abort test that, frankly, they were not on the hook from NASA to do an in-flight abort test, and they did one anyway, and gave up a first stage. And so, yeah, it's a totally different philosophy, but that got them to where we were in 2020 and a successful flight. And then I think they've done 4, 5, 6 or 7 crewed flights on Dragon already in 2 years.
Yeah, so, counting the demo flight.
Counting our flight and counting the Inspiration 4 flight and counting Axiom. I think they're kind of up there with that, with that. So yeah, it took a little getting used to, but I think by the time we got on the rocket on May 27th and then again May 30th, I think both Bob and I were extremely confident that we would be successful.
Well, it's been nice talking to you.
You
Doug.
bet. Hey, great to meet you.
Thank you.
Well, that was quite an interesting interview. We're going to take a quick break. If you have a question, please send us an email. You can see the address down there at the bottom of your screen. And coming up next is Term of the Month with Stephen.
Thanks, Don. The term of the month is Green Comet. Back in January of 2018, the term of the month talked about why the color green isn't very common in the night sky. But Comet C 2022 E3 ZTF has been dubbed the Green Comet. Why is it green? Glad you asked. This comet is shedding diatomic carbon. That's molecules with 2 carbon atoms. This material absorbs light from the sun and emits it as fluorescent green in the tail. It was expected to be brightest on February 1st, though comets are notoriously fickle. Reports are that it reached magnitude 5.6, which is faint but visible to the unaided eye. It has looked good in binoculars. It's already heading out from the sun and getting dimmer and dimmer. The last time it was in the solar system was about 50,000 years ago. Don't worry if you miss it. Oh, we'll see it again. We may never see it again. Green Comet is not bound to our solar system. Thanks to club member Doug Bach at the Northern Cross Observatory for these February 11th photos. This second one has Mars, bright Mars, at the top and the comet below. And that is the term of the month, Green Comet. Back to you, Don.
Thanks, Stephen. Welcome back. We're here in the studio with John McGill, our guest for this month's program. And in this segment, we'll talk about the Crew 5 launch. Now, John, I remember there's a lot of competition between Boeing and SpaceX to be the first company to return American astronauts to the International Space Station launched from American soil.
Yeah, there was a lot of competition back then, but the real prize was capturing the flag. And that flag was actually left by Doug Hurley on the last crew mission of the Space Shuttle, STS-135.
And so the idea then for him leaving the flag was to...
Well, yeah, they left it on the hatch where the shuttle used to dock between the mission patches from the first shuttle mission and the last one. It had a message that it was to be removed only by a crew launching from KFC.
Which is the Kennedy Space Center.
Exactly. With all the competition to be the first to fly the new vehicle to the space station, and really early on, I think the odds of SpaceX, a newcomer to the space industry, beating the perennial favorite Boeing were pretty big, but in the end, it seemed only fitting that Doug, being one of the astronauts that left the flag, was able to actually capture it for SpaceX.
And where is this flag now?
It's actually back at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne.
Oh, all right, all right. So it's kind of ironic then in a way that he was the one to leave it and the one to retrieve it.
Exactly.
Interesting, interesting. And now I hear, too, that Doug recently received a medal from the United States government.
He did. That was given to him by VP Kamala Harris. She awarded Doug the Congressional Space Medal of Honor for bravery for flying the first Dragon crew flight.
So I hear Doug mention that the Crew 5 was about to launch. Can you give us some information about that?
Yeah. It launched last fall, and I got to be with the astronauts and when they were saying goodbye to their families.
Wow, that really must have been an emotional time for them.
It was. They first walked out of the building where they get suited up, and they walked out under their banner. Then they huddle up for a group photo, and then they disperse to their families where they are waiting in a roped-off area that keeps the astronauts quarantined so they don't even get to hug their families, but everyone is happy to see each other. Then they get into the Teslas, and you can see how the emotions change from happiness to it's getting real. And yeah, that's when it's all about to happen. SpaceX always comes up with catchy license plates for the crew cars. And in this image, you can see that they substituted a 5 for the S in blastoff to commemorate the Crew 5 launch.
Oh, you know, I saw this picture earlier, but I didn't notice that until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, and here there are my images of their successful launch to the ISS where they are now.
Interesting. When are they supposed to come back?
They go up there for a 6-month trip, a rotation they call it.
Okay.
And so they'll be back shortly, another couple months, because as I said, that went off in the fall, so they're about ready to come home. But there was actually a problem that went on the ISS with the Soyuz rocket, and that had a leak. And there in this image, you can see where it was leaking, what the astronauts actually saw from inside the space station.
Not a good sight. Not a good sight.
No, it wasn't. And there's a lot of interest of what actually happened. And a day or two before that, they had to do a maneuver to take the space station to a different orbit because of orbital debris. And there's also a question of whether it was from a meteorite. And
Okay. Well, that'll be interesting when they be able to find that out. John, I want to thank you for coming on the show again today and filling us in on this interesting information. Please visit our club website. can see the address down there at the bottom of your screen. And coming up next, as always, with What's Up, is Stephen.
Thanks, Don. The What's Up in the Night Sky for March 2023. The days are getting longer in the Northern Hemisphere and shorter in the Southern Hemisphere. Spring equinox is on March 20th. The time change, for those of you who do daylight savings time and follow the U.S. Time change is March 12th. February starts with a full moon on March 7th, last quarter on the 14th, new moon on the 21st, and first quarter on the 28th. It's almost like a week is 7 days. Then we have Saturn and Pluto. Saturn is in Aquarius, rises 20 minutes before sunrise and to an hour before sunrise at the end of month. And Pluto is in Capricornus and rises about an hour and a half before sunrise to 3 hours before sunrise by the end of the month. So it's not a bad month to get up early in the morning and get your camera out or get your 10-inch or larger telescope out and see if you can't find Pluto. Jupiter is in Pisces and sets an hour after sunset to about a half an hour before sunset by the end of the month. It is best at the beginning of the month. Jupiter is very near in the sky to Venus on the 1st. We're looking at this at the very end of the month. Jupiter is near Mercury on the 27th and 28th, so you can see them here in this image. Mercury is in Aquarius and moves to Pisces by the end of the month, and it rises, at the beginning of the month, it rises 20 minutes roughly before sunrise, and at the end of the month it sets 70 minutes after sunset. And that's because Mercury has superior conjunction on the 17th. This is not a great Mercury month. It's very close to the sun all month. It is better at the end of the month, being a little bit farther visually from the sun at 14.2 degrees. And yet on the 31st, we have perihelion, so Mercury is closest to the sun physically. It just happens to be farther away visually. Venus is in Pisces, goes to Aries over the month, sets 2.5 hours after sunset to 3 hours after sunset by the end of the month. It's a little bit better at the end of the month. Uranus is in Aries and sets 5 hours after sunset to about 3 hours after sunset. It's best at the beginning of the month. Uranus is very near to Venus on the 31st. Mars is in Taurus and moves to Gemini over the month and sets at about 3 a.m. local time, and this has to do with daylight savings. We don't see Neptune. It moves from Aquarius to Pisces, but it is seriously not visible because Neptune is faint and it has superior conjunction on the Ides of March. And that's what's up in the night sky for March 2023. Remember, we don't charge money for this show, but we may tax your brain.